Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Vaibhav Jyotsna Srivastav, and with me is Aditi Lumba bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi launches the One Sun, One World, One Grid and the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States initiatives in Glasgow. Prime Minister Modi meets world leaders including that of Ukraine, Nepal and Israel on the sidelines of COP26. More than 100 world leaders promise to end and reverse deforestation by 2030 in the COP26 Climate Summit's first major deal. In Afghanistan, 19 people killed and 50 wounded in two explosions at Kabul's biggest military hospital. UK and France agree to negotiate a proposal to defuse their dispute over fishing rights in the Channel. JAXA and ISRO agree to strengthen bilateral cooperation in space at the Japan-India Space Dialogue. And in the ICC T20 World Cup, India to play Afghanistan in the Super 12 match on Wednesday. As India created history by administering 100 crore vaccine doses against COVID-19, All India Radio salutes all the doctors, nurses, other frontline workers, and all those who got vaccinated and made this possible. Even though the country has achieved this feat, we caution our listeners that the battle against COVID is not yet over. We appeal to our listeners to get fully vaccinated at the earliest and also help others get vaccinated. During the festival season, please follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011 2397 8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that the Indian Space Research Organisation ISRO will soon provide the world a solar power calculator application that can measure solar energy potential of any region across the globe. Speaking at the session on accelerating clean technology, innovation and deployment at Glasgow, Mr. Modi said this application will be useful in deciding the location of solar projects and will strengthen the One Sun, One World and One Grid initiative. He said solar energy is totally clean and sustainable, and the challenge is that this energy is only available during daytime and dependent on the weather. He said One Sun, One World and One Grid is the solution to this problem, and through a worldwide grid, clean energy can be transmitted to anywhere and any time. The Prime Minister said this creative initiative will not only reduce the carbon footprint and cost of energy, but will also open a new avenue of cooperation between different regions and countries.
चुनौती सिर्फ इतनी है कि सौर ऊर्जा दिन में ही उपलब्ध है और मौसम पर भी निर्भर है। वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड इसी चुनौती का हल है। एक वर्ल्ड वाइड ग्रिड से क्लीन एनर्जी हर जगह, हर समय मिल पाएगी। इससे स्टोरेज की आवश्यकता भी कम होगी और सोलर प्रोजेक्ट की वायबिलिटी भी बढ़ेगी।
Early in the day, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also launched Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, IRIS, on the sidelines of Climate Summit in Glasgow. Mr. Modi said that it is aimed at achieving sustainable development through a systematic approach to resilient, sustainable and inclusive infrastructure in small island developing states, SIDS. Speaking on the occasion, Mr. Modi said the launch of IRIS gives a new hope, confidence and satisfaction of doing something for the most vulnerable countries. He said the last few decades have proved that no one is untouched by the wrath of climate change, and the small island developing states face the biggest threat from climate change. The Prime Minister added that the Indian Space Research Organisation, ISRO, will build a special data window for small island developing states to provide them timely information about cyclones, coral reef monitoring and coastline monitoring.
भारत की स्पेस एजेंसी इसरो सीड्स के लिए एक स्पेशल डेटा विंडो को निर्माण करेगी। इससे सीड्स को सैटेलाइट के माध्यम से साइक्लोन, कोरल रीफ मॉनिटरिंग, कोस्टलाइन मॉनिटरिंग आदि के बारे में टाइमली जानकारी मिलती रहेगी। फ्रेंड, आईरिस के साकार करने में CDRI और सीड्स दोनों ने मिलकर काम किया है। ये को क्रिएशन और को बेनिफिट्स का अच्छा उदाहरण है।
Speaking to the media late in the evening, India's Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla spoke about the significance of this initiative.
IRIS is a unique initiative that aims to achieve sustainable development through a systematic approach to promote resilient, sustainable and inclusive infrastructure in small island developing states. This initiative will be demand driven. In other words, the SID countries will initiate the process of letting the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure what sort of projects and what sort of initiatives they would be interested in on climate change and climate adaptation and infrastructure.
India will achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070 and reduce 1 billion tons of carbon emissions from the total projected emissions by 2030. The country will bring down the carbon intensity of its economy by more than 45% by 2030. These were the major announcements made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the National Statement at the World Leaders Summit of COP26 in Glasgow. Mr. Modi said that India will bring its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030 and it will fulfill 50% of its energy requirement through renewable energy by 2030. Mr. Modi said the country constitutes 17% of the global population and its contribution to the emissions has remained only 5%. But today, the entire world admits that India is the only major economy which has delivered on the Paris Agreement in letter and spirit. The Prime Minister opined to track climate finance just like we track the progress of climate mitigation. The Prime Minister also urged to make lifestyle for the environment a global mission. Welcoming India's announcements in Glasgow, Professor Lord Stern of Brentford of the London School of Economics and Political Science said that it was a very significant moment for the summit, with Prime Minister Modi pledging stronger action by India on climate change with 5 new targets. He added that the rich world must respond to Prime Minister Modi's challenge to deliver a strong increase in international climate finance. More than 100 world leaders have promised to end and reverse deforestation by 2030 in the COP26 Climate Summit's first major deal. Brazil, where stretches of the Amazon rainforest have been cut down, was among the signatories on Tuesday. The pledge includes almost $19.2 billion of public and private funds. Meanwhile, the UK said that it will commit £1.5 billion over 5 years to support the forest pledge. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is hosting the global meeting in Glasgow, said a total of 110, more than ever before, had made the landmark commitment. As the UN Climate Summit, the Conference of Parties COP26 is underway, All India Radio brings to you a ready reckoner to explain the key concepts associated with the summit. In the COP26 Explainer series, every day we bring you the terms and concepts that will be in use in COP26. Today we shall talk about the climate finance.
Climate finance is the flow of funds to all activities, programs or projects that support climate change-related projects, whether mitigation or adaptation around the world. The funds can come from a wide variety of sources, public and private, bilateral and multilateral, and alternative sources of finance. In the Paris Agreement in 2015, developed countries committed to a goal of jointly mobilizing $100 billion a year by 2020 to address the needs of developing countries for meaningful mitigation actions. Subsequently, this target was pushed to the year 2023. India has consistently called for greater contribution to climate finance from the rich countries for the developing countries to combat climate change. At the COP26 in Glasgow, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India expects the developed nations to make available the climate finance of $1 trillion at the earliest. Subhadra Ramachandran for World News.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday met the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, on the sidelines of COP26 in Glasgow and exchanged views on bilateral and regional developments. He appreciated the cooperation between the two countries during the COVID-19 pandemic, including mutual recognition of COVID vaccination certificates. Mr. Modi also held a meeting with Prime Minister of Nepal, Sheikh Bahadur Deuba. In their first engagement since Mr. Deuba assumed office, the two leaders discussed ways to further strengthen close bilateral ties. They also discussed climate, COVID-19, and resolved to work together towards post-pandemic recovery. On the sidelines of COP26, Mr. Modi also held a meeting with Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett. In their first such engagement, the two leaders reviewed the bilateral ties and discussed expanding cooperation in areas of high technology and innovation. The two leaders exchanged a light moment in front of the cameras in their meeting, in which Mr. Bennett referred to Mr. Modi as the most popular man in Israel. Mr. Bennett asked Mr. Modi to join his party as both leaders burst into laughter. Later, Prime Minister Modi also met Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates. Meanwhile, China on Tuesday said President Xi Jinping was not given an opportunity to deliver a video address to the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow, Scotland, and had to send a written response instead. President Xi, who did not attend the UN meeting in person, delivered a written statement to the opening high-level segment on Monday, in which he offered no additional pledges while urging countries to keep their promises and strengthen mutual trust and cooperation.
The UK and France negotiated a proposal to defuse their dispute over fishing rights following Britain's exit from the EU. French President Emmanuel Macron said on Monday he was postponing planned trade sanctions on Britain so that negotiators from both sides could work on new proposals over post-Brexit fishing rights. The UK government, in a statement, welcomed the French government's announcement. The statement added that they are ready to continue intensive discussions on fisheries. The UK spokesperson welcomed France's acknowledgement that in-depth discussions are needed to resolve the range of difficulties in the UK-EU relationship. The rich fishing grounds around the Channel coast have been an irritant in the relationship between Britain and France. The leaders' row erupted in September after Paris accused London of failing to allocate enough post-Brexit licenses to French boats to fish in the zone 6 to 12 nautical miles from UK shores. UK-France relationships have also been negatively affected by AU-KUS row.
In Afghanistan, at least 19 people were killed and 50 wounded when two explosions followed by gunfire hit the biggest military hospital in Kabul. According to reports, the Interior Ministry spokesman, Qari Saeed Khosti, said that the explosions took place at the entrance of Sardar Mohammad Daoud Khan Hospital in central Kabul, and security forces had been sent to the area. There was no confirmation of casualty numbers, but a Taliban security official said there were at least 15 dead and 34 wounded. In 2017, the Islamic State, IS, which had carried out a series of attacks on mosques and other targets since the Taliban seizure of Kabul in August, had attacked the hospital complex, killing more than 13 people.
Guyana has recognized India's indigenous vaccine, Covaxin. In a statement, the Indian Embassy in Guyana said that it is an important step in the post-COVID partnership between the two nations. On Monday, Australia joined the growing list of nations recognizing the Covaxin COVID vaccination for international travellers. Meanwhile, in India, over 106 crore 88 lakh COVID vaccine doses have been administered so far under the nationwide vaccination drive. A total of 10,423 new cases were reported in the last 24 hours, in the lowest in 259 days. The recovery rate is currently at 98.21%. Fiji has announced that it will open to fully vaccinated tourists from several countries, including Australia, New Zealand and the US. The tourists must have confirmed 3-night bookings at approved resorts from December the 1st. Australia's biggest city, Sydney, will lift more COVID rules for vaccinated residents as early as next week, almost a month ahead of schedule. From Monday, Australia began allowing fully vaccinated citizens to fly internationally without taking any special permissions for the first time since March 2020. Singapore began quarantine-free travel for people from several countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany and South Korea from September. However, only 4,000 people in total are allowed to enter the country per day. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates around the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle at AIR News Alert.
In today's Hotspots section, we bring you a discussion on India's roadmap at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. In conversation are Dr. C.K. Varshni, an environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
Minister Modi made big, bold plays at climate summit in Glasgow and said India will go carbon neutral by 2070. Plays was among 5 commitments by the Prime Minister at the COP26 conference in Glasgow. This looks like a practical long-term target, keeping in mind our development and aspirational targets. Professor Wasney, were you expecting such a big, bold statement by our Prime Minister at this conference?
I think this is a very important declaration that has been made by the Indian Prime Minister, Shri Modi ji. And it only really says that India is very serious about the issues of climate change. While we find that the global community is still not at same wavelength in terms of taking climate change with the seriousness that it deserves. Considering the economic and social development of India, and also considering the current as well as the total historical contribution of India, which is very, very small as compared to many other countries, the kind of commitment that has been made is quite substantial, and it is likely to be improved further in future as we develop our technology as well as renewable energy resources. I think there were more important points that were made, and one of them was lifestyle changes, because lifestyle has a great bearing on carbon emission. And in fact, it is the lifestyle of the people in the developed world which has been largely responsible for disproportionate emission of carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases by them in the past, and also it is continuing. So I think these are some of the things which are required to be given very serious thought.
Professor Wasni, you spoke how India has set this ambitious target. Our target time is only 10 years more than China and 20 more than US and European Union, which are far more developed because of our enhanced share of green energy and other environment-friendly. Government of India has been working on a slew of schemes to safeguard the environment and to promote a greener India. So what are the initiatives you think we could see in the coming time to achieve this target?
So I think there are many initiatives which we have already to a certain extent achieved in a big way. For example, the transition from incandescent bulb to the fluorescent bulb. It is a very major change. And at the same time, it's a question of providing reliable as well as less polluting cooking energy to our domestic users throughout the country, and for which programmed activity has been unfolded and it is taking shape. You are right that we have got tremendous amount of developmental needs for which we will need more energy. But then at the same time, the global community has to think about the carbon justice, because the carbon space is a common pool resource. And if it is filled by the developed countries because of their past emission, and whatever residual is left for the others to use, I think this is injustice. And one of the developmental goals that we have says that disparity has to be removed. So I think these are some of the things about which we have to really think very carefully. The more important point that the Prime Minister has made and has been speaking on behalf of the developing countries is the question of financial assistance, which the developed countries have to provide, which they have promised and which they have not been able to keep. So I think looking at the kind of seriousness that should have been there is somehow lacking. And thus aggressive targets which are expected at this time have not been forthcoming in a very enthusiastic manner. I must also point out that the Paris Agreement and the kind of carbon neutrality that we are talking cannot be achieved unless the ecological systems are maintained, improved and supported. And about which I must say that there has been very little talk about the biodiversity conservation, because 50% of the emission is absorbed and neutralized by the oceans, by the forests, wetlands and grasslands and other natural ecosystems. And we find that because of the new minerals and the greater need for industrialization and many other resources that we are trying to tap, these resources are a danger. And thus, it will be difficult to achieve neutrality unless at the same time there is also a commitment to create net zero loss of biodiversity, which has to be an important ingredient to really achieve the kind of net zero that countries are trying to propose.
Professor Vasni, I would like to talk about, unlike countries in the West or even China, India is decades away from its peak in terms of economic growth and energy consumption. And obviously, our energy demand is expected to grow faster than any other country over the next few years. So India, which is one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of global warming, and we are already actually bearing the harsh consequences of climate breakdown. We have seen flood, in Kerala, millions across the country are exposed to severe heat, water shortage, extreme weather events, and which has all been increasing in the recent years. So obviously, this announcement by our Prime Minister has injected a new life into the talks. It was a chance for obviously India to show that it can deliver on both economic development and climate change, and it seems to have delivered. Do you think that India has now put the ball in the court of the developed world? We have done our bit, despite the challenges that we have to grow, we have to develop, and we are also facing the climate change. But now it is your turn to fulfill your commitment.
Exactly. I will say that you have really hit the nail. If you see that what has happened after Paris Climate Accord, whatever India committed at that point, it is almost going to realize much earlier than the targeted time. While other countries have dragged their feet and have been totally lacking in meeting their commitments. Number one is United States. You know that they have withdrawn from climate change. It is only now that they have entered. And we have yet to see that how far they are able to contribute and how far they are going to compensate for the time which has already gone. And secondly, as about China is concerned, it is very difficult to what happens in China and what they are intending to do. But they have already declared what they have declared at Paris Summit. And beyond that, they are not going to really add any new commitment. And thus, whatever India is saying, our track record shows that we are serious about it and we are making every effort to really meet our commitment and to deliver. And I think we have already proposed in this direction few initiatives which have now gained recognition globally by the international community. First is the Solar Alliance, and the activities within that are now very actively being pursued. And I think it has a lot of promise to deliver. And the second thing is Disaster Risk Reduction Alliance, which the Prime Minister has proposed in order to really pool the resources of the countries to meet the emergent situation which an individual country and developed country is incapable of handling these major so-called, which are in fact initiated by human mismanagement, the natural disasters. So I think these are very positive things.
Professor Vasni, you touched upon climate financing to achieve the target. Now the Prime Minister has already set our target. The real challenge is obviously figuring out how to finance the transition to net zero, which is going to require trillions of dollars of investment. Prime Minister Modi obviously reiterated that rich countries should help support poor nations by raising more money to accelerate the shift to the clean energy. I think it is expectations of the developing countries like India that the world should be able to generate $1 trillion for this climate finance. You think that is going to be realistically possible, or we also have to do something within our own economic planning to generate more funds for this switchover? How is that going to happen?
Apparently, it looks very difficult. But fact of the matter is, if we are really serious about climate change and to contain and cap emission of greenhouse gases, we must realize that there is a huge subsidy that is being provided to the petroleum industry, which runs into $10 trillion plus. And there's a time that has come that we should withdraw because we must stop further mining of these petroleum products. then if we withdraw that, then this sum is available. So the question is a question of taking a very serious auditing as to where the countries are spending their money. So on one hand, we are really providing huge subsidies, which is given to the petroleum industry, to the fossil fuel industry, which ultimately is responsible for the kind of problems that we have. And I think on the other hand, we find that we do not have resources. So I think it is a question of reallocating resources, keeping high priority of climate change. I think it should be possible.
Thanks a ton for your time.
Thank you.
The second meeting of the Japan-India Space Dialogue was held virtually on Tuesday. The Japanese Foreign Ministry in a statement said that the dialogue provided an opportunity to exchange information on the space policy of each country. Japan's space agency JAXA and its Indian counterpart ISRO held discussions on space security, bilateral cooperation between their space industries, global navigation satellite systems, space situational awareness (SSA), space-related rules and norms, and other areas of mutual interest. The statement added that both sides deepen mutual understanding on respective space policies and agree to further develop concrete cooperation between the two countries. Both sides also decided to hold this dialogue on a regular basis to enhance bilateral space cooperation.
In T20 Cricket World Cup, chasing a victory target of 190 runs, Namibia were 116 for 5 in 18 overs against Pakistan at Zayed Cricket Stadium when the reports last came in. Earlier opting to bat first, Pakistan posted a total of 189 for 2 wickets with the help of Mohammad Rizwan's not out 79 and Babar Azam's 70 runs. In another match at the same venue, South Africa defeated Bangladesh by 6 wickets with 39 balls remaining. Put into bat, Bangladesh scored 84 runs and were all out in 18.2 overs. The Proteas achieved the target in 13.3 overs. On Wednesday, India will take on Afghanistan while New Zealand will clash with Scotland. All India Radio is broadcasting ball-by-ball commentary of the World Cup matches. Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian says Bosnia is in danger of breaking up, warns top international official. Globe and Mail writes, Chinese government urges families to keep stocks of daily necessities in case of emergencies. Financial Times reports, Fed prepares to start tapering as U.S. inflation concerns persist. The Washington Post says Biden unveils new rules to curb methane, a potent greenhouse gas from oil and gas operations. And Wall Street Journal says Yahoo pulls out of China, ending tumultuous 2-decade relationship.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi launches the One Sun, One World, One Grid and the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States initiatives in Glasgow. Prime Minister Modi meets world leaders including that of Ukraine, Nepal and Israel on the sidelines of COP26. More than 100 world leaders promise to end and reverse deforestation by 2030 in the COP26 Climate Summit's first major deal. In Afghanistan, 19 people killed and 50 wounded in 2 explosions at Kabul's biggest military hospital. UK and France agree to negotiate a proposal to defuse their dispute over fishing rights in the Channel. JAXA and ISRO agree to strengthen bilateral cooperation in space at the India-Japan Space Dialogue. And in the ICC T20 World Cup, India to play Afghanistan in the Super 12 match on Wednesday. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Kuwait.
वैष्णव जन तो दीने कहिए जे बीध पराई जानी रे बरदू के उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नानी रे.
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.